Okay, let's see. Are we live? Okay, it says we're live. Hopefully that's
All right,
true.
let's go.
Hello and welcome everyone. We're treading new ground for my channel here, both in the only the second time I've had a guest and the first time I've done a live stream. If it all falls over, then sorry, we'll try and post a recording later instead. But so far it seems to be working. so
Yeah, so far, knock on wood.
so let me welcome and introduce my guests. I've got Lianna Gerrish with me today. Lianna is a long time, I think, all the way back to the beginning, FMWC competitor, and the founder of Rate My Excel. Do you call it RateMyExcel.com or just Rate My Excel?
I think I call it Rate My Excel, but yeah, either way works for sure.
All righty. So we've got a few people here in the live chat. So the idea of doing it live is so that people can throw in their own questions. I've got a bunch of things I want to ask Lianna about, but we're open and interested to hearing other people's things as well. So I'm going to be keeping half an eye on the live chat while we go. But no questions yet, not to be expected, I suppose. So let's just dive on in. So the first thing I wanted to ask you about is, you've got your own Excel business. So, I mean, A, maybe you could just tell us a bit about it, and B, I'd be interested to hear, like, how did you get into it? How did you think about, like, were you working a kind of normal job before? How did you think about making the transition? Just tell us a bit of the background.
Yeah, so my background's corporate finance, and Rate My Excel does skills tests for spreadsheet skills. And sort of where it came about was doing job interviews or getting interviewed. And I don't know how it was because you're more banking, right? But the job interview, people would just be like, "How would you rate your Excel skills on a scale of 1 to 10?" And then the expectation was you would say like 8 or 9, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's pretty good." And then they would just move on. And so people would get the job and start, and then they'd be like, "Look, I'm going to level with you. I've actually never used Excel before." And then you were just kind of in a pickle from there on out. So I thought, what if there was like an objective way for people to see if they're actually a good fit for the job or not? Because the other side of it is a lot of times people think they're an Excel expert because they can make a chart and they just don't necessarily know all the different features that it has.
Yep.
So I don't know. That's kind of my dream, is for there to be an objective way for someone to know, are you a new person, intermediate, expert, and just kind of know how you stack up against other people.
Yeah, it's funny. It was like going back almost 10 years now. It was one of the appeals of Modeloff for me was like I was in, a small, it was like an office of 150 people or so, and I was sort of the Excel expert in the office, but I had absolutely no sense like outside that one office. I had a sense that like there was a fair bit of Excel going on there, but like how did that compare to what people could do in the next office down the street? I had just no idea, and like most people don't.
Right. Yeah, because you're just in that little bubble where you do a pivot table and everyone just stops and is like, what was that?
So we have a first question from the chat. So what kind of clients do you like are mostly looking for these services? Is it banks, boutiques, consulting, corporations, other?
That's a good question. It's a mix of recruiting firms that kind of want to have like one standardized test for hiring for their clients, and then just corporations and internal HR that want the same thing. They want an objective measure of someone's skills because a lot of times with hiring and interviewing, there's biases, there's like inconsistencies, and so having like a standardized one yardstick for something like this is really beneficial for companies.
It's interesting you said. I can definitely picture a scenario where, like, I think about some of the modelers I know, if they were interviewing, be like, so how would you look up data from here to here? Well, you could be like, fired. I haven't even hired you yet, but you're fired.
Did you just say the letter V? Get out. Yeah, for sure. Because like there's some people who have quirks about wanting things done this way or that way, and you can be a little inflexible. And so, yeah, I think you would end up weeding out maybe a lot of good candidates if those people had hiring authority for sure.
So one thing I'm quite curious about, just because this is kind of closely related to my experience, like trying to, shift into having my own business, which is, how did you manage the transition? How did you think about, the risk of doing your own thing? Did you do it as a side hustle for a while? Like, how did you navigate that?
Yeah, like for me, I was in corporate finance for forever, and I always wanted to get into consulting because I just wanted to build stuff. I just wanted to solve problems. I just wanted to work in models. I didn't want to sit in meetings and read people's emails all day. And but I didn't really think I could do it. I thought you had to be like a special personality type or something. And so I took a career move into this like really small mom and pop consulting shop, and it was like just basically these people hiring their family members and like people from their church and then me, and then working with them I realized like, oh, there's really not any like special magic to you. You just need to have the skills to go off and do it. And so that kind of gave me the confidence I needed to set up shop on my own. And how was it for you? Like, what made you decide to take the plunge?
Well, I mean, honestly, the biggest factor for me was that I didn't exactly take the plunge. And like the thing that I was always kind of nervous about was, I've got a full-time job, I've got a reliable income, and now, I have to go out on my own. And like, what if there's a period where, I haven't built up clients yet, whatever. What I actually ended up doing was, I mean, my full-time job had become very much not a full-time job after having kids. Like I shifted down to like working 4 days a week and then working 3 days a week.
Nice.
And I basically wanted to kind of shift down more than that. And so we ended up coming to a deal with my old employer that they basically became my sort of anchor client. And so I kept, we sort of negotiated, but we basically kept the bits of my job that were most, uniquely me, that were hardest to replace, which was, quite seasonal. So like I'm kind of quite busy with them around the end of the year.
Hmm.
And then I do like a half a day a week or so with them the rest of the year. But that meant, you know, even if I didn't attract any other clients, I would still be making some reliable income. But it also meant that I had a chunk of my calendar wide open that I could then go and try and pursue other things. So for me, that was the sort of, low risk way to make the move.
Yeah, wow, that's brilliant. That's a really good way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people, if you can, if there's, and I think it can be a win-win situation, right? Like if you have a sort of subset of your job that you're hardest to replace in, then there's an incentive for your employer as well. Um, but yeah, that's that's how I made the move.
That's awesome. Yeah, it definitely seems like from talking to clients about, other consultant experiences and stuff, like if you can actually get stuff done and then you have like a skill that they need, like that's 90% of consulting, is just the ability to do what you say you're gonna do, like somewhat on time. That's really all it is.
Yeah, yeah, and that's that gets you repeat business, and then that that gives you a sort of safe baseline to build from.
Yeah, for sure. And then referrals and then on and on and on.
That's the dream, the virtuous cycle. So, shall we talk FMWC? It's stage 3 this weekend. You feeling ready?
Yeah, I'm really excited. I don't know what to expect because so far this year we've had some like more creative cases. We've had some like esoteric getting into the weeds of finance cases. So my heart tells me we're going to get kind of like a back to basics case. I don't know what you're thinking. If you're thinking like debt waterfall, three statement model.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's the sort of case 3 has been pretty wacky in a way the last couple of times. And I mean, the first one, like Janice's one, is
Yeah, that's what I
as
was
his ones
thinking
always
of.
are, was very hard.
It
And
was
it's
fun, but it was a lot of reading the instructions like with a magnifying glass. Yeah.
yeah. It's, I mean, I always find with his cases, like I find them terrifying to compete in, and I don't do particularly well in them. And like I always know it's not going that well when it's not like build the model and then answer the questions. It's like look at the first question. What do I need to do to answer that? Okay, I'll build a little bit. What's the next question? What do I like? I have no idea of the kind of bigger picture of where I'm going. I'm just kind of groping around trying to follow the signs.
Yeah,
But
like
but
when you
but
get question one wrong, you're like, oh no, oh no.
yeah, exactly. But you know, I also like those questions because I always learn something from them looking at them again afterwards. So you know, like no complaints there. And like Harry's one quite similar actually. Like um, you know, I I really enjoyed digging into that more afterwards and like geeking out on all the kind of fun things you could do with it. But you know,
Yeah, I
at the
love
time I
Harry's
was like,
cases so much. Yeah.
yeah. But at the time I'm like, open-ended question. I don't know what to do with this. The time pressure is
Yeah.
real.
The cool thing about Harry's was it gave you a ton of clues in the question breakdown, like just from the names of like the different keywords. You're like, oh, Harry's learning about machine learning today. And so you could kind of do like a little bit of like free studying and find some really good tutorials on like the basics of it. And I feel like that helped me cut down on my instruction reading time a lot with the last stage.
Yep, totally. I mean, I sort of over prepped for it because I kind of read the signs and thought there was something quite specific coming, which was not what was coming. So I was like, if it had been what I thought it was, I would have crushed it. But of course, it wasn't because that's not how it goes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I do that all the time. I get like really hyper fixated on, oh, it's going to be this. And then you open up the case and you're like, well, that was 3 hours wasted, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, I say that, but like there's like two times that I've kind of prepped something very, very specific, and that time did not work out. But the other time did. It was the option pricing case. I think maybe in 2021,
I
and
remember that
they
one.
had like posted a
Yeah.
guide of like, you know, this is the basics, the principles. But if you look at the basics and the principles, it's not that hard to think, all right, so what does the model look like? And so like I had built, you know, my little option pricing model, and like I still built from scratch when the question came, but you know, I had built it a couple of times before, and so it was like super quick.
I wish I had done that because I saw that. I was like, oh, I can price some options, whatever. But then during actual competition time, when you start doing like the branches and they start just getting out of hand really quick by the third or fourth branch, you're just like, I should have planned better. So yeah, well done.
Yeah, well, you know, sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. All right, we got another question in the chat, which is, how do you prepare for the Microsoft Excel World Cup, not the FMWC, so the Excel esports, in other words? Do you have a training schedule, or do you just keep solving, working in Excel, getting exposed to frequent small problems? And says, asking because if Excel will become a recognized esport, we'll probably see more and more training taking place. And that's an
Yeah, that's a really
interesting
good question.
prospect.
So I'll go first. I like for MEWC, I like the Lawrence Lau strategy of just do grind out past cases because with MEWC, you kind of see these like similar patterns emerge. Like you'll look at a case and be like, oh, this is one where I need to use mod, or oh, here we go with text manipulation, or we're on a grid today, so I need to convert letters to numbers and back again, or oh, it's a lot of Unicode pictures of bears. So it's like if you can like get comfortable with, you know, the top five or so types of cases, then that'll really help you like start flying through the levels quickly, I feel like, on competition day. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a lot of patterns that keep coming up. Like when you say the grid one in particular, like I look at Bo Rittabon's solutions to some of these, and like the way he does, like he often kind of unravels the grid by kind of, basically tagging each cell with an address as like whatever, row 1 is 101, 102, 103, row 2 is 201, 202, 203, whatever. And then you can kind of, unwind it all into a single column and kind of work a lot more flexibly with it. And that's just kind of one example, but yeah, there are definitely patterns that come up over and over that you sort of get to recognize. I don't know that I have anything kind of smarter than just do past questions. The thing I always struggle with, probably more with esports than with the regular one, I'd be curious to hear how you think about this, is how much to read the instructions. Because I think at the moment I don't read them all that closely, because there's not, like when you're on the live stream, you get the question kind of 5 minutes before, you can take some time to read, and I think it really helps. But I don't know that it helps enough that I would take 5 minutes out of the 30 minutes that I have to do everything to just sit and read. And also, like, just reading it without working through it, it doesn't always click, like, what the heck is this saying? But I'm always debating, like, have I taken this too far? Because most often where I go wrong is I kind of, zip through the first few levels because it's, they're pretty simple ideas. And then I get to something more complicated and I build something that's not what I'm like, that's not answering the question I'm supposed to be answering. I don't know. How do you find that?
I feel like my biggest challenge, especially with MEWC, is reading comprehension, because you just don't have that much time. It's like everything's so fast. So what I try and do is just skim it and see, like, okay, we're, selling picnic baskets, or we're playing whack-a-mole, and just kind of get a feel for what we're doing and what type of case is it. Is it something where we use mod? Is it something where we're mapping things? And then I try and work through the really easy levels 1 and 2 to get familiar with the data. But same as you, a lot of time I find that when you get to the later levels, you've like painted yourself into a corner and you have to shift things around, or I'm moving from helper columns to a data table. And I feel like I lose a lot of time that way.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting thing. Like having one setup that you run all the way through to the end is definitely a time saver if you can pick the right setup. But yeah, I mean, if I've had it happen often enough that, I have something that works up to whatever, maybe level 3, maybe level 4, but then I have to do a complete rebuild to do the next level because that approach isn't working anymore. It's like, maybe I would have been better off to read the higher level and take some time. The challenge is always, if you do take all that time, then it might be that, you build the beautiful general solution and don't get it finished on time.
Right. Yeah. Especially for MEWC, doing it offline, it seems like you really want to clear levels 1 through 5. I used to think bonus questions were key for offline competition, but now I think you get so many points from levels 4 and 5. And if you take, just that 5 minutes to do a couple bonus questions, like a lot of time I finished level 4 and 5 with errors that I maybe could have prevented if I had like focused on it more. So like, I don't know, I'm still struggling with how do you split time between bonuses and the regular case.
Yeah, I feel like it's a little easier when you are offline because then you can do the bonuses whenever and they're still there. So I usually kind of just go through the levels, and then as it's whatever the last 5 to 10 minutes, then I'll kind of think to myself, okay, do I have enough time to finish this level? And if I do, like you said, level 5 is usually like 360 points or something, like a lot. And so if you have time to finish it, that's better than doing bonus questions. But if I feel like I'm stuck, then I'm like, all right, let's pivot to the bonus question. But that it's all these judgment calls that you make in the moment, like you can easily get them wrong. Like I remember the one I got knocked out on in the MEWC last year, I got to level 5, I was like, oh, I have 8 minutes left. I can't do level 5 in 8 minutes. I'll go do the bonus questions. Did the bonus questions, came back with like 4 minutes left and almost got level 5 done. I was like 30 seconds short. I was like, why didn't I just go and do it? But
gonna haunt you forever.
that's okay. Last year I didn't miss out on a trip to Vegas. This year I got to take it more seriously.
Yeah, for sure. I still it cracks me up. Like, I feel like you got knocked out early in that tournament the past couple of years, and there's always someone in the YouTube chat be like, "Chin up, buddy. You'll do better next year." It just cracks me up. I don't know why.
Yeah. It's I, someday. I mean, I've said to Andrew, like, he sent me an email after I got knocked out the first time, hard luck on my rant. And I remember someone sent me a message at the time, like, oh, this thing of like going one-on-one, like it's really harsh. You're up against someone who does particularly well that round, you get knocked out. Maybe it should be whatever, the top 4 out of all the 8 go through, or whatever.
Yeah.
But I remember saying to Andrew at the time, like, don't do it, because like for me that would be better, like something that makes it a little more predictable and whatever. Like I would be more likely to get through. But for the tournament as a whole, it's more interesting when there is enough randomness. Like, oh yeah, this guy was like one of the top seeds, but he went out in round 3. Haha. Like it makes the whole thing more like, it's still usually highly ranked people who make it all the way through to the last few, but there's also usually a handful of people who weren't seeded at all. And it's like, that's more interesting.
Yeah, I like seeing the new faces, and so you can't just be good at Excel to make. You also have to be lucky, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, anyone who tells you they can do this without getting lucky, it's one of the nice things about like the difference between the MEWC format and the FMWC format. It's like the FMWC is like almost designed to exclude luck as much as possible. It's like you just average everything out over many, many rounds. But the esports is just get knocked out, you're done.
Yeah, it's wild how different they are. Like the FMWC, it's 2 hours. You put your headphones on, just chill, do some Excel. And then with MEWC, it's like it's a half hour, but it's over like that, and you're like sweaty, and you're just like, what just happened?
It's funny you say that. Like I remember you mentioning something to me before about music during the round. I've never done it. I never even kind of thought about doing it. But I mean I don't find either of them like chill or relaxing at all. I find I'm like sweaty and tense after either format.
Need to go lie down.
Yeah, I mean it's probably more so like in the last year or so, because I feel like in the early days of FMWC and kind of during all of Model Off, you basically felt like if you got the questions done and the answers right, that was great and you were happy, and move on. But now I think partly because of the change in the questions, and I think partly because of Lawrence coming along and shaking things up quite a lot. But like now it's like if you want to do really well, you got to do all that and have 45 minutes to spare. It's just like a crazy sprint.
Yeah, I feel like there's definitely like a big gap between, you guys in the top 10, where like the competition now is like so fierce, and it's not just getting a perfect score, like you said, it's doing it in like 68 minutes. But then, to be in the top 25, top 30, you don't need to get the time bonuses. You can take it slow and just sort of show up every stage and still get ranked pretty high. But yeah, like, I don't know if it's like, do you think folks in the top 10, they do a lot more prep work, or like, what do you think, or work on their speed, or what do you think like sets people apart?
I mean, it's interesting for me. I mean, I do, I guess probably now I've gone through cycles. Like I've been doing, flavors of this since 2013 with my first year in Model Off. I've definitely gone through, some years I'm just like, whatever, I'm ready enough, let's go. And then sometimes I'm like, I want to do well this year. I'm going to practice. I'm going to train. I find it very hard to train for speed. I had a conversation with Lawrence about this. I told him, like, I think he probably had a very unusual situation at the start of last year where, he basically bashed through there were like, I guess 16 previous rounds. So he went through like 50 questions in a short space of time, none of which he had seen before. And like, there's enough repeated patterns, and I've got a good enough memory and a good enough, like, often it's like there's some particular trick you need to wrap your head around, and like it's never the same twice. And so it's not just, typing really fast. It's like coming up with a solution in a fast way. And that it's really hard to practice that by going back and doing the same question again, unless, you just totally didn't get it, or like totally ran out of time or something. But like if you did it, but slowly, or you did it, but eventually realized the trick and implemented it, even a couple of years later, you go back and you'll have some memory of what that trick was. And so, it's this sort of speed to comprehension is the part that's really hard to train by looking at past questions if you've done all the past questions before.
Yeah.
So I still do a certain amount of like, prep. Like I usually try and do, especially once the question guide comes out, if I have some sense of like, okay, it's this topic area, I'll try and do like an old question on that topic, just so that, some of the execution is more fluent. But I feel like that only half prepares you to sort of train for speed.
Yeah, for sure. So for FMWC, when you see the breakdown come out, you focus more for practice on doing cases by that same author, or do more like topic specific work?
It depends on how clear the guide is on what's coming up. Because, sometimes they're like very good, you are going to be modeling X scenario. And then I'm like, okay, let's go and find a question about, as close to X scenario as I can get. And sometimes it's like, just, there's going to be a really interesting question by this person and it's got this ambiguous name, and like, you have no idea what they're talking about. And then it's just, maybe you'll get some insight by doing an old question by the same author. 50-50. I mean, I would do it. 50-50 is worth it. You might get some edge, but who knows if it's going to help.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes the breakdown's really helpful, like you say, and sometimes it's like, well, you're going to be working in Excel, get ready to get frustrated, and then that's like all they say.
Oh yeah, well, you always know when Andrew puts something in there about, there's going to be some questions that you'll really learn from here. It's like, oh God, this is going to be terrifying.
Yeah, or the ones where he's like, we had to pare it back, in practice because it was too difficult for us. Then it's like, oh, I'm not gonna get the time bonus this month.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting thinking about the time bonuses with, like if there are a bunch of bonus marks and it's, you need to get 900 out of like 1200 to get be eligible for the time bonus, then it's like you'll have a pretty high degree of comfort if you've got like most of the way through it, of like, am I sure that I've got 75% right? Yeah, I mean, you can use most of the questions, you can usually tell if you've got the answer right. But when you need to get 900 out of 1000 and there's like a free text question that's worth 70 marks, then it's like, okay, so if I got that wrong and I have no feedback at all on that, and I get any other question wrong, I'm not going to get the time. So how do you think about that? Like, do you just spend a bunch of time going over everything? It probably won't help, but it might. I find that pretty tricky.
Yeah, I have a hard time tracking the time bonuses. Like I think I only get them a couple times each year, so it's like not a big factor for me. But like for me, it seems like if I'm cruising through the first and second case and like I haven't had to go and double check anything, and then the third case is starting to look easy, it clicks for me like, oh, this is an easy round. Everyone's going to be done in like half an hour. I better step it up because I know like the time bonus is going to be a factor. But yeah, a lot of times, like you said, it's so hard to like micromanage. Okay, I can get this many wrong, and do I go for the bonuses or the time bonus? And so I don't know. A lot of times I feel like I just ignore it.
Yeah, I'm usually like, I always have a little tracker. Like I take the question guide and I put the kind of points per question into into a sheet, and like as I'm going through, I'll basically, put in some guess of, how likely do I think it is that I got this right. Which is like, I'll usually just put in kind of one if my answer was among the choices, or, if it's a free text, I don't know, 50%, 30%, who knows? Or if it's like, which of these four categories is biggest, smallest, or like, what's the number, and it's between 1 and 6. It's like, well, you're not going to know. Like if you got it wrong and you get a 3 but it's a 2, you're not going to know. If you get 163,475,236 and 45 cents, and that's one of the answer choices, so like, yeah, that's pretty much sure to be right, unless they're really screwing with you, which I think they mostly don't do. But so I'll basically like, tag each one, like, okay, these ones I feel good about, I'll put a 1. This one's like a small whole number, I don't know, 60%. This one's a free text, 30, 50%, whatever. And then it'll kind of keep a little tracker for me at the bottom of, okay, so this is what I think my score is. Mm-hmm. And then, if it comes down to, okay, there's a really ugly looking last question that might take me like 20 minutes to get 100 marks or something, then I'll be like, okay, how confident am I that I've made it to 900? And if I feel good about it, then I'll probably just stop and not attempt the last question. And if I don't, then you got to try.
Yeah, those last stage, question 3 bonuses, that's like, all right, everything you built doesn't matter. We're going to be changing everything. And then we're now doing a different model. And it's just all for one question. Like sometimes it feels good just to hit submit and know you're going to get some time points versus like sweating through that last bonus.
Yep. Although I feel like I've mostly got the call right. But I've definitely had at least a couple of times where I've ended up in like high 800s with time to spare. It's like, damn it.
And then it gets graded on a curve, and your 890 turns into like 300. Just like that.
Lawrence isn't that good yet. He might get there, but so just to kind of shift for a second, because I missed it while we were in the flow here, but it's a question, I guess, going back to sort of the real business side of things, which is, are you experiencing less interest from your clients in using Excel with more focus on Power BI and other intelligence tools? I don't know, what do you want to?
Yeah, it's weird. I got into, not to be a hipster, but I got into Power BI in like 2012 when it was Power Pivot. And I was so psyched. I was like, this is going to change everything. No, we're not going to pay $5,000 per Tableau seat. Everyone's going to have BI tools. We'll be writing DAX measures all day long. It's a game changer. And then like a decade went by and I feel like no one really cared about it. But so I got a little soured on the whole Power BI thing, but I'm finally now noticing that clients are interested in building dashboards in Power BI. They like that it's integrated into Teams. They like that, it's drag and drop, it's colorful, and they can get live useful information like at the click of a button. And so I feel like it is getting more popular. Luckily for me, I'm pretty proficient in both, so I'm fine to do either. But yeah, I feel like it took a while, but I think the shift is finally happening.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I was not an early adopter, but I mean, I haven't really used like Power BI as the sort of standalone tool. I've used Power Pivot and Power Query in Excel. But yeah, for me, it was just sort of, I reached a point where some of the data stuff I was working with was getting like so big and so hairy that, I was doing it with a combination of like manual stuff and VBA, and it was like just taking forever. It's like, okay, there's got to be a better way. And as usually happens when I think to myself, there's got to be a better way, and take to the internet, there was a better way. And I've been a happy Power Query user ever since. But yeah, I mean, on the original question, I haven't noticed a lot more demand for it. Maybe my clients are on average just particularly old school, but like most of the senior people I work with sort of consume reports in PDFs. Like they don't even open the Excel file. And so the idea of something that's kind of whizzy and interactive, it just I can see how it's useful to lots of people, but I don't get a lot of demand for it.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. And to your point, Power Query, I feel like on my end is replacing quite a lot of VBA work because it's faster just to like build everything in and then set a parameter so they can change the like folder path, file path, whatever, and just hit refresh. But at the same time, like they're once that exists, they're asking for weird stuff like, well, I don't want to click refresh in the ribbon, I want to click a button. And so I feel like VBA is like coming back in. So now I'm doing this weird hybrid of like really old and newer technologies to get people their reports and to automate stuff. So it's been pretty interesting past couple of years.
Huh. Do you use Office scripts much, or you still all VBA?
I want to get into Office scripts because like I feel like I'm getting pushed out of VBA now that it has to be in a trusted location that's set up by the user to run. It's like kind of a really big headache for a lot of my clients. And so like every morning I wake up and say, today's the day I learn lambdas and I learn Office scripts. And then I haven't really done much with either in the past couple of years, but I feel like 2023 is my year for Office scripts. I'm gonna try and make it happen. What about you? Are you dabbling in it at all?
Not really. I mean, I've looked a bit at what it can do. I haven't really done anything with it yet. But I mean, one of the things that's really interesting for me that Office scripts gets to is like the idea of kind of time-based triggers and not needing your file open to run something. So like, with like Power Automate, Office scripts, all that stuff. Like to give you a random example, a few years ago, like we have a nanny who looks after our kids when my wife and I are working. And so a few years ago, I set up a spreadsheet for her payslip. And after kind of doing some digging, this is probably blasphemous to say now, but I think it was legitimately harder to do in Excel at the time. But after doing some research, I set it up in Google Sheets, and used their app script to have it basically, update the week and send me a PDF every Friday morning. So, both as a thing to then send on to her, but also as a kind of reminder to me, okay, it's time to pay. And like that, there's a bunch of stuff that I do, every Monday morning, which, if instead of arriving in the office at X time and getting to work on it, I could say, okay, Power Automate at 6 a.m., just start doing all this stuff. I'm sure it couldn't all be automated because there's some things that I have to look at and make a decision on and whatever. But even just like I get lots of, updated files that get either automatically or from a person emailed to me every Monday morning, and like save them all down in a folder and then kind of Power Query a bunch of stuff with them. But, why not just have Power Automate say, put this here and this here and this here and this here, and then I arrive and it's all ready to go. I'm definitely interested.
Yeah, Power Automate for sure. It can do like just trying to
Oh,
see what
hey.
it can do. Yeah, it can do everything. It can like you can like build training models on it to just do really tedious stuff and like pull stuff out of pictures or PDFs, and it's ridiculous. And like you said, the scheduling piece of it and navigating like on websites to do things in the background, like it's so cool.
Yeah, yeah. And like, there's some stuff that I have a few files that like once a month or so I go and like scrape a bunch of data from the web. And again, it's like there's no reason that I should have to set myself a reminder, open this file, start it running, as opposed to just, hey, once a month at this time, go do it. But I'm excited for it, but I haven't got there yet.
Yeah, there's definitely like inertia, where you're like, this is gonna be really cool once I do it. But you just, I don't know, there's so much other stuff going on. It's rough.
I'm curious, just kind of circling back to FMWC land, do you ever use any of the kind of non-grid stuff? Like, do you use VBA? Do you use Power Query? Do you use Power Pivot? Anything kind of in the competition?
I feel like I used to use VBA like 2020, 2021. There'd be like weird cases where you could crank through stuff faster. And then I think you did like a Power Query specific case once for FMWC where that helped out a lot to just, you know, consolidate data in seconds. But I feel like especially with these new like dynamic array functions that are so versatile, they're kind of replacing a lot of what I used to want to use VBA for. And now I kind of feel like if I'm thinking of using VBA in a case, it's almost like a trap and it's going to end up being more of a time sink than doing it like the proper standard Excel way. So I haven't really touched it lately. What about you?
I I have never used VBA in a competition. Sorry, no, slight lie. I attempted. It went very badly. Maybe that's part of why I don't do it anymore. But my first model off final, um, there was like a problem solving question, which I thought I can use VBA for this. So I did a bunch of like setting stuff up to, I don't know, whatever it was, to like lay out the different possibilities. And then I was going to have some code cycle through it. And then I opened up the VBA editor like about halfway through the time and realized that it was locked because they had some like VBA code for marking your attempt or whatever. And so they had just blocked it so you wouldn't be able to access the code. Uh, so you weren't allowed to use VBA. I was like, God damn it!
Ah!
That was like one of three things that went spectacularly wrong for me on that one same question. So that wasn't even the worst of it, but yeah, but honestly, that was the only time I even tried. I don't think there's ever been a time since then when I thought maybe I better use VBA here. I know other people do for some things that I wouldn't do in VBA. Other people do. Like, I've seen Harry use VBA where I would use a data table, for example, just to kind of cycle through things a bunch of times, which makes sense if you're more comfortable writing code than doing a data table or than doing whatever. Then it's not that I'm sort of suggesting nobody should use VBA. Just I don't do it. I mean, part of it is also I'm not particularly good at VBA, or at least at VBA without
Yeah.
Google there to help me. Like I write, I find it incredibly powerful, but incredibly powerful with like very simple stuff, like PDF this thing, email it to this person, cycle through this thing a bunch of times, scrape this data, whatever. But like it's all pretty basic stuff that I do.
Yeah, where I could see using it nowadays in competition, like especially in the MEWC side, is like doing looping through and doing a find and replace if there's some weird stuff in the questions. Like you need to replace dice with numbers. So you just do
Mm-hmm.
like a for 1 through 6 loop through this and replace this. I mean, but really that can save you over just doing like Control H and doing it manually. That can save you like 30 seconds. So I don't know. That's kind of where I am at now with VBAs. Like I think it can help you with aspects of it, but not like crack the whole ace. I think that it's dangerous now to go down that path.
Yeah, it's funny. That's how I felt about lambdas for quite a while when I was like just getting the hang of them. It was like this could be quite powerful, but like if it goes wrong, they're really hard to debug and whatever. My level of comfort with lambdas is a lot higher now, and I make somewhat fewer dumb mistakes with them. So I have used them in rounds a few times now, um, but yeah, there was definitely a degree of nervousness there for a while.
Does it seem like a really big like time saver? Because I know Bo is an expert in using lambdas in his speed runs. So do you feel like it saves you a couple minutes when the times where you like dare to use it?
It depends a lot on the case. Like there are some where it's kind of night and day. Like there was one, it was probably a slightly easier one than the regular competition because it was for the university challenge. But there was one that I tested for Andrew where it was like a board game, and you go around the board, and there were like different things for, you had to get to the end of the board, but there were like different rules in the different levels for what would happen when you got all the way around. Like in other words, did you have to land exactly on the finished square, or did anything going past the finished square still count as finishing, or did that mean you had to go back to the start, or did that mean various other things? And like that was a sort of one line solution with scan, because the sort of setup for scan of like, here's where I am, here's the next step I take, and what's the logic that I apply to take the next step is, that kind of thing that you do in a dice game is exactly what scan is set up for. And so it was like, even without kind of time to think about it in advance, it was just kind of easy to do. Or there are some things now where, like you were saying about, doing a bunch of substitutions. Like there was one of the kind of short main FMWC, not esports, but one of the kind of short questions there that was about like stripping numbers out of a string. And my immediate thought was to do that with reduce, which is like one of the Lambda helper functions that lets you kind of loop through doing something a bunch of times. So you basically just say, start with this string, and then for each input, and the inputs are like the digits 0 to 9, substitute out the input, replace it with blank, and it just kind of does that 10 times right away.
Wow.
So yeah, like some of the sort of scan, reduce, map, like some of the helper functions make it a lot easier to, like if you have to kind of completely write your own, like write a Lambda that has some complicated logic, that to me, that's still more challenging, especially like, one that calls itself or something like that. But where you can just kind of write a really simple Lambda in, wrapped in one of the helper functions that already applies it a bunch of times for you, then I think it feels pretty comfortable, and it's definitely a time saver.
Okay, so it's like a gateway into full lambdas is these helper functions you're talking about, because it does seem like a different way of thinking almost when you're looking at like writing a lambda from scratch and trying to think how to sort of like making the jump to Power Query and writing an M language for the first time. It's just like slightly different from normal Excel.
Yep. Yeah, Bo commented, lambdas and nested array formulas take a long time to debug. That is very true. You gotta have a high degree of confidence that you're getting it right the first time if you're going to try and do that in a half hour, question.
That's so funny. Yeah, that's for sure on my to-do list. Maybe for the next FMWC, because I saw you had some nice intro to Lambda videos on your page with some like practical examples. So I think that might be a good like way to dip a toe into learning lambdas and getting comfortable.
It's funny, my by far my most successful video about lambdas was one that, like, I look at it now, I'm like, that's not really the best way to do this anymore. It was good with what I knew at the time, because it was like stuff about doing looping with lambdas basically, but now I've realized that actually you don't need to make these kind of somewhat complex lambdas that call themselves. You can just use reduce to do most of that now. So but we live and we learn.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of like the helper functions, they came out later, didn't they? First it was just like lambda and let, and you had to do things like in the Stone Age, but now I feel like there's a lot more out there to help you out.
100%. And like I said, I find it a lot easier to do like a relatively simple lambda as part of a scan or a reduce or a map than to write a lambda from scratch that's super complicated.
Yeah, that's awesome. Maybe because I know you author a lot of cases, maybe in the future you can like think of one that's optimized for lambdas. That would be, if you did it that way, it would be a lot easier than old-timey Excel.
Yeah, I mean that is definitely not an untempting idea. Although I feel like I'm chuckling to myself because I was talking to Lawrence about this a little while ago. We were both up in Boston doing like a conference together, and he told me he doesn't have Microsoft 365 because he doesn't want
He
to.
doesn't want to pay the $8 or whatever. It's like, I'll set up
I mean,
a fund to the
I
license.
I get it. Like the mentality, I find the idea of like Excel as a subscription really weird, because it used to be like you got a computer, it came with Excel, and then that was just it. You
And
like
you were
it
good,
did, did
yeah.
Excel forever.
Mm-hmm.
So I get the like I don't want to pay up, but on the other hand, I feel like there's enough good new stuff coming out now that I'm like, it's a no-brainer. You got to have it. But yeah,
Yeah.
I was telling him this, and he was obviously unconvinced. But I feel like at some point, the gap between what you can do with 2019 or whatever, like he's not totally without modern functions, but he definitely doesn't
Yeah.
have any of the latest and greatest. I feel like at some point that's got to catch up to him. But then again,
Yeah.
I
It's
keep
gonna
waiting for that to happen. He hasn't really stumbled yet.
yeah, you would think at some point it'd be like in the old days, there's like this group of people who didn't want to learn the ribbon. Do you remember Excel 2007? And they're
Oh
like,
yeah.
no, I'm gonna be on 2003 until I die. I will never learn this ribbon. And it was like, I felt like not even that big of a deal.
Yeah, I mean it's funny. So I didn't start work until like my first kind of proper job was 2008, but my company was still on 2003 until kind of a good while later. I remember
Yep.
every now and again there'd be like someone would, oh, I got a special exception because our client had a file with more than
It
65,000
was
rows. Like,
70,000
woo!
rows.
But it's amazing. I always tell people like I did like advanced Excel training at my first company, on Excel 2003. And I look back at that now, and like so much of what was like cutting edge at the time was workarounds for things that are simple and native now, like get a unique list or sort things dynamically, or just kind of workarounds for the fact that there was COUNTIF but not COUNTIFs. Like, how can you do multiple conditions? How can you do sums with multiple conditions? Like,
Yeah.
all that stuff is just kind of out of the box now. And like in in 2009, if you didn't have Excel 2007, you could probably get away with it. But now, if you didn't have Excel 2007, or even like 10 years ago, if you didn't have Excel 2007, it would be kind of ridiculous. And I feel like we're not that far away from it being kind of ridiculous if you don't have let and lambda and tucol and hstack and whatever.
Yeah, like with clients, I used to have to ask like, oh, what version of Excel are you on? But now I feel like 80-90% of everyone's just on 365. Like that's just what everyone has nowadays.
Yeah, it does make it, although even then there's all the different channels that I have to keep track. Like, my computer, when I go into DB, was like, my home when I'm on the whatever, the kind of beta experimental whatever, like insider whatever I can get, the most advanced new thing I can get to, I take it. But like I only very recently got lambda and like hstack and all that stuff on my DB machine, even though they're on 365, but it was just they were a cycle behind or something. So yeah, I feel like I still need to ask people like, all right, what have you got? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, type in equals let. Okay, good. Now type in equals lambda. Okay, good.
Yeah, for sure. Like in the old days, it'd be like, I forget what newer functions for me, like I always want to use XLOOKUP. So whenever I couldn't use that, it was a little bit of a bummer. But yeah, or like, am I using concatenate or concat? You just had to like kind of remember for each client where they were at. So, because if they start seeing those name errors in the file, they're like, we've been
Yeah.
hacked.
I feel like the compatibility checker is actually pretty good for that. But yeah, it's definitely like, it's been a while since I did a project where I couldn't even use let, but I remember that after I'd gotten used to it was like having a hand tied behind my back. Like, guys, we could make this a lot nicer if you would just like, All right, fine. That was like they wanted to share the model with a kind of bunch of different investors. They wanted to
Mm,
have as little assumption as possible about what everybody else was going to have, which is like fair enough. In that situation, you got to go lowest common
yeah.
denominator.
Yeah, there
But
might be a Lawrence out there, you don't know.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So one thing I wanted to ask you about, we should probably kind of wrap up soon, I guess, but I wanted to ask you about one more thing, which is you wrote a question, an esports question. I'm curious about like, what was your experience doing that? Did it give you a sort of, insight from the other side into the competition? Does it change how you think about prep, all that stuff?
Yeah, kind of like, I guess starting at the end, the biggest change is after having written the case, now while you're doing a case, you kind of get distracted by like, oh, that was a really nice element they put in there from a design perspective, you know? And it's like you're trying to like solve the case, but your brain wants to focus on like, oh, but this exception they put in there is here to like trip you up, and then you really start appreciating stuff like that. So that is a bit of a downside, but no, I really enjoyed. I did the euchre case, which was in the MEWC like tournament last year, and I would not recommend doing a card case because there's there's like all these borders you have to put around the card so it looks nice for TV. And
I
it, as
assumed
you
they would have done that. You'd be like, just here's the thing.
maybe they would have. I never even thought to ask, but I feel like 40% of my case design time was shifting and aligning these borders. Um, but yeah, you definitely learn a lot. Like going in it's gonna be hard, but you don't really realize like for me it was tough because I knew in my head what I wanted the case to look like, but getting it down into the spreadsheet and then laying it out in the different levels so it like builds in difficulty, I found really tough. And I found writing the instructions to be really tough because I couldn't think of like a clear way to just articulate what the case was trying to do. Um, and then we ran into that classic thing where it was like basically unsolvable in round one. So I had to go and trim it back and make it a lot easier to do. And so I think if I did a case next time, I really appreciate cases now like tug of war, or like the little Unicode ones where it's simple in explaining it, it's simple in designing it, and there's like a lot of variability in what you can do with it versus having a card case is like, oh, I imagine dice cases are
Yeah,
the
you
same way.
gotta.
It's rough.
Yeah, I mean it's like if you're gonna do a particular card game, then you want it to be somewhat true to that. But then it's like the rules of the game can get pretty damn complicated.
Yeah, yeah. Turns out it's hard to do a full-on Trump-based card game in Excel, but I will say that working with Andrew was a great experience, and it was definitely like an awesome learning experience for me to design a case. And I feel like the first one you do is probably the hardest one, and you pick some stuff up along the way. So if I do a second case, I feel like it would take probably 25% of the time that first case took me. Is that what you found going to your, subsequent cases?
I don't know if it improved, if my ratio improved that much. Hey, Eric. Um, yeah, I mean, it definitely got faster. Part of it is sometimes I have an idea and it's like, if I could do this, it would be really neat. But to do it, I have to like generating the data, either for an esports or a regular case. It's just like really hard. It's like, I did one on, employee turnover a couple of years ago. I think there's actually the one that was kind of set up for like you probably want to use
Power
Power
query.
Query for this.
Yeah.
But like building the data set that was, here's the whatever 5,000 plus employees that this company has over an 8-year period and who joins when and who leaves when, such that it's kind of growing at the right rate. There's turnover at the right rate. Like it was a ton of work.
Yeah.
It was like really hard, like much harder than anything you had to do in the case.
Yeah.
But I had this like whole big big model, and like, I had to come up with some sort of turnover function that would give me vaguely plausible data, but would also have, some, like, I didn't want it to be just totally random, because, if someone's been there long enough, then maybe they'll stick around longer. I definitely overthought, let's
You
be honest.
totally did.
But
You totally did.
But it's like, a case like that, if you have data that doesn't make sense, then it's kind of unsatisfying. But anyway, yeah, that was really a lot of work. And same with, I think I told you before about the Othello one, like generating the boards for that. Like, I went and found a bunch of real Othello games, but then I had to, translate the dense code in which they were written into positions. And like, that was really hard. I was really tempted to make that be the problem, but we decided it was actually too hard to do as a half-hour problem. But, I mean, you can also save yourself from that. Like, I get these ideas, and I'm like, this would make a really nice case, but the data is really hard work. And I just kind of, I better just do it because I really like the idea. But I feel like you could also, like you said, you look at some of these cases where the design is such that it is simple. Like, it's just, the input is just a few numbers. You can randomize, you can design a couple of edge cases if you want to, but like, you can mostly just generate random numbers, and it'll work. So yeah, I mean, if someone's doing a first case, I would definitely recommend, lead yourself down the easier path rather than the harder path.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, or like Peter's laundry case last month, where it's like you just see and you're like, oh, it's like not simple, but just the way it's set up is almost elegant, because it's like you have this set of rules you have to follow, and they get slightly more complex as they go. And then it's just like a lot of letters smushed together, and then that's it. There's no like Othello boards or card games or anything. It's just text. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I would say is, like, I've spoken to a bunch of people lately who've been kind of interested in the idea of writing a case, but not sure that they could. And I feel like what they often underestimate is, you're not kind of writing it all by yourself. Like, you'll draft something and share it with Andrew or his team, and they'll try it and they'll give you feedback. And, they've tested and calibrated like a bajillion cases by this point, so they know this stuff really well. And so, like, you have a sort of really helpful, knowledgeable partner there who can help you with it if there's bits that you kind of struggle with. So I always kind of remind people of that it's not as daunting as it seems, or it doesn't have to be anyway.
Yeah, you have a bunch of people help you out. And then I remember when I was doing my card case and I found out it was like too challenging, I was like telling Andrew, like, yeah, I'm gonna have to dumb this down a little bit. And he's like, oh, I totally know what you're talking about. I'm the guy who made Excelopolis after all. And I was like, oh yeah, you did.
Yeah, that case gets a tough rap. I don't think it was, even though I scored whatever 8 out of 1,000 on it, I don't think it was that bad. My 8 out of 1,000 was mostly it was like, I think it was, you needed to have 10 times. I thought it was greater than instead of greater than or equal to, but it just meant I had like a ton of off by 1 errors. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the things, like, they have got a lot more thoughtful over time about, like, how do you try to make sure that people are calibrated, on the first couple of levels, so that that doesn't happen.
Yeah, there's level 1 now will always be like, write down your name in the box, and you get 80 points. So I'm so grateful for that, because that was the big hesitation for me to do the live competition is, what if you get a case and you don't even know where to start, or you don't know how to build the model, but now they have it so like structured, so it builds in difficulty, that I feel like that hesitation is gone.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, some of the early cases, like, I think about the Battle of 16, the first year.
Yeah.
The final of that was 1,000, and it seems like, a total wipeout. But actually, it was, all the marks were got in the last kind of 5 minutes, because it was all kind of set up a whole big thing and then dump out all the results. And so,
Yeah.
you've no way of knowing, like, was the other person 30 seconds away or 40 minutes away from being done. So I feel like in that regard, it's like you don't like it, nobody finishes on zero anymore, or like very rarely,
Hmm.
because there's always something accessible, which seems a lot more reasonable. Like, it's not that anybody who enters these things is not doing anything for 30 minutes. And so you kind of want the marks to reflect that a bit.
Yeah, for sure. Now with the bonus questions in there, that's like an additional wrinkle, you know? So I don't, yeah, it's definitely changed a lot from the old Battle of 16 Days. Was that Baccarat? Was that final
Yep,
case?
that's the one.
Okay, I didn't even watch it. My brain was so wiped because it was like we had done like three cases in a row and they were like harder than they thought. So they just kept giving us more time, I think was that one. And so I just like passed out on the couch and I was honestly like pretty grateful I didn't make it through to the finals. So that was you and Gabriella.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
I think I messaged her after like, man, I don't know how you did that. Like just hours and hours of just high stress building in
Yeah.
Excel.
I mean, it is. It's really intense. Like we did the. I never made the finals of any other ones since, but like we did the all-star battle, and it was similar, like three cases back to back, and just like crazy high intensity for all of them. I was so drained by the last one. Um, but yeah, I guess that makes for good television.
You gotta watch people suffer.
We've got one other question, going back to business land for a minute. In your experience in Excel consulting, how do you set boundaries between being just an Excel expert versus being a full problem solver going into business problems that clients have?
Man, that's tough because I feel like I'm terrible at it. Because like a lot of so don't do what I do, but a lot of times for my clients, like they don't have a strategic finance department or they don't have that technical finance skill set. And so like it's really just me they can reach out to. So a lot of times we'll be building like a really cool model, for investors to get that Series A closed or something. But then I'll get an email like, hey, I have an error in this spreadsheet. Can you help? And so for me, it's like no big deal just to take the 5 minutes and help them out. And then it like, because I know it saves them hours of work. So for me, I don't really like draw those boundaries, but I'm starting to think maybe I should. What about you?
It's interesting. I mean, I guess that's. I read the question and had a sort of slightly different idea in mind, which, I mean, I guess there is this sort of, if you're the person the best Excel user they know, then they'll go to you with all their stupid Excel questions, which is a challenge and may require some boundary setting. But as I read I thought of it as, I wouldn't necessarily want to set a boundary that I am just an Excel expert, as opposed to kind of looking at business questions for the company more broadly, because I think of it as, you know unless your client has like an unusually complicated Excel need, which some of my clients do, but not all of them by any means. Um, People who can do Excel stuff are more of a commodity than people who can do Excel stuff, but also translate that into a business discussion. Like, okay, I've built your financial model, with all the assumptions you gave me, and here's the answer, versus I've built your financial model. I want to challenge you on a couple of these assumptions because I'm not sure they're realistic. And, based on the output, my recommendations are A, B, and C. I think there's a lot more value to the client and frankly, a lot more scope to charge more of a premium rate if you can if you can give a sort of more holistic solution than just trying to keep yourself in your lane of Excel. So,
Yeah.
I would, as I read the question, which is, I guess, a little differently from how you read the question, is I would say, don't set that boundary. Don't say I'm just an Excel expert. Like, be a business expert who is knowledgeable in Excel.
Yeah, for sure. And like, you kind of have that credibility because they know, hey, you've worked with a bunch of different industries, a bunch of different companies. Like you have that insight into what a lot of other companies have done. And I think a lot of my clients really find that valuable because they don't necessarily have that perspective.
Alrighty, I'm going to give one last window for anyone else to ask a question. Otherwise, God, we're over an hour. That flew. we should probably wrap it up. So,
Yeah.
so thanks for everyone who joined in the live chat with questions, and thank you, Lianna, for joining me. This was an interesting foray into not just solving a question for a while, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, hang on. One person, Eric, snuck in a last second question. What percentage of your clients are on Office 365 versus older no Lambda versions? I love that you put no Lambda in scare quotes because that is to be feared. I think I don't know. I feel like the ratio has shifted a good bit for me over the last kind of year or so, but like my frequency of engagements is not that high, so that could just be noise. Um, I think more than half are on good Lambda friendly versions now, but my sample size is not that big because I don't try to take on that many engagements.
Yeah, I feel like mine's like maybe 10 to 15% no lambda. And the surprising thing for me is some of my clients that are like law firms or more like stodgy companies, they're now on 365, whereas before I would have guessed they were still rocking like, desktop 2019 or whatever. So I feel like, and there used to be like a weird bunch of tech companies that was really pushing Google Sheets, like 5, 6 years ago. And I feel like that's faded as well. And everyone's just on 365, and that's just what we're on forever now. Sorry, Lawrence.
I mean, this is again blasphemy to say there are some things I really like about Sheets versus Excel, but I think again with the kind of more recent developments, it's definitely tilting more heavily Excel. But like there's still those few edges. Like I love the query function and that kind of. Anyway, I'm not going to go off down that rabbit hole. That's for like a whole full other video some other time. Oh, hey Harry. Um, all right, I think. Oh, I loved it too. Ooh, that's a hard line. You don't take on clients that aren't on Office 365. I mean, I get it. I get the motivation. That's that's strict, but I mean, you're very good with lambdas, so that makes sense. Yeah, it's funny when Harry and I were looking at at the Amazon reviews question afterwards, the one of the things that we did was like, what are the words that are most predictive of the different reviews? And like looking at the collection of words most predictive of 1-star reviews was fun. It's like all these kind of super negative adjectives and then China. I'm just like, oh God.
Oh no.
Anyway, yeah,
Let's not
exactly.
put that in the case.
All right. Well, I think it's probably time for us to wrap it up. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you for joining me, and yeah, thanks everyone for watching along. I'm going to try and turn off the stream. Let's see if I can get that part right. Boom. Oh wait. Boom.
Off the air.
We are off the. I'm just going to wait.